the work is all made of steamed and bent wood. The space for the work is the root. Let's start from another point of view. The room here is actually about the size of a swimming pool, and when I do swim quite a lot, and so that the making, at some point during the period of making it, I realised that I actually kind of knew how big the space was, and so I had a very clear understanding of how big the space was, and how many. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to, and I wanted actually to fill the gallery with work, and I think originally I'd wanted to have as if the whole floor, as if it was a whole floor. But what's kind of happened is as if the floor is actually kind of broken up into parts and curled up and dried up, so that the I mean, there's a funny contradiction. If you think about it like that, you get this kind of funny contradiction between thinking of the floor as a kind of fluid surface which has dried up, but at the same time the works are quite lyrical, quite kind of quite fluid in their individually. They all have this kind of sweep and curl. Technically it starts from something quite simple. It starts from asking myself the question as to whether it's possible to bend a piece of wood in ways that accomplish a spiral or a twist. Most of the times I've bent wood before, it's always been in the same plane, and there was some the work starts from several very simple places. One of which was just a question of, can I do a bend that's a spiral, a bend that's a twist? There are no drawings. You've got to, so there isn't a plan. The plan gets built up from hints as you go along. A part of the plan is the space, an idea of the space. Another part of the plan has to do with, I'd be interested to make something that is where the bend, where I'm not making a circle. If I bend it in a spiral or in a twist or in a thing, then it enables me to make something that isn't a circle. It kind of gets me away from joining up to the end I've begun, and therefore allows the work to wander, or the kind of the work to develop. So that's another point. A third point is just well, why make this here? And that there's a way in which one time when I was coming up here, I did see just flying in just over the river, there was this extraordinary against one of the sandbanks. There was an extraordinary spiral coming out, which I mean, I had my camera with me and I photographed out the window of the airplane. So if I hadn't taken the photograph, maybe I wouldn't have been quite so, but because I had the photograph, I kept on looking at it and thinking, this is quite an extraordinary shape. And it was that, so then that kind of reference ties up to having an idea about what this space looks like, you know, having a kind of fairly clear idea in my head what this space looks like, and this notion that of trying to make something that fills the space. But at the same time, I also wanted you to be in it, so that the separation between the parts allows you to be in it. When I was making the work, I actually imagined that it in reverse of the way it is. That the lowest pieces would be at the front or the entrance, and the tallest pieces would be at the back. And so that as you walked, as you came in, you saw it kind of climbing up. In fact, and this partly has to do with the not being able to see it completely when I was when I was making it. In fact, it's much better to see this low one from a long way away and to approach it and then turn around than it is to come across it first. And so so you kind of come through the space and then turn back, and then it is starting to come towards you. You, as it were, you cross the sea and you get to the edge, and then you look back and you see it kind of coming in towards you. I also felt that and there are two entrances to the gallery spaces, and the installation has to deal with being approached from two directions. This tall one, I'm speaking formally now, this tall one through the door, through the big door, is, because it's taller, is something you can see from a long way away. From the other door, you see it makes a feature of the lines of aluminium plates that join the things together. And actually that, I think that's quite important, because it makes you realize that the aluminium plates, as well as the wood, are really quite an important part of the work. And I think that, and there are some things which came up partly by accident, and I think these things are important. That the screws, it's joined together with aluminium plates. It's not, there's no glue involved in this. The idea was that it was kind of like stitched together, the work, and because the wood isn't particularly thick, the individual planks that make up in order to get the screws to bite, they had to go through the surface, because the first little bit, which has the point on it, doesn't really contribute much to the screws biting. So we had to let them come through. And the original intention had been just to grind them off once they were through. But when I say we, I mean the two people that I work with and myself, decided to leave it until the end before we did that. And then, in particular, when we made this one, it was starting to become clear that really they're doing something quite interesting to the surface. And formally, I think what it does is that because the screw comes through, you think it's the back, yes, because the screw's pointing through. So then that turns them around and makes the plate surface at the front, although so you're caught in between thinking that the wooden surface is the unplated surface is the front, and thinking it's the back. And somehow there's this sense in which the two surfaces are continually reversing themselves, which you think of as the front. And it also a bit depends on which is the surface that you see, so that clearly from where we're standing, we can see this low one and the tall one, that both surfaces are working well as main surfaces. Yeah. But if they were turned around, it would also be true that so the plates kind of allow there to be a difference, but also allow it to turn around on itself. And that mental turning around reflects some of the twisting that's going on. The spikes also have some other little things, like they look like on the kind of rolled edges. They start to look like the kind of pins on a pianola roll. So they start to kind of have some sense in which they have some other sort of relationship. And then and if you think of that as a relation, you can also see somehow that the tabs perhaps can also work slightly musically. I also think that there's also, I think of them as a bit like riffs, in the sense that for example, this little spiral occurs, followed by that is one sequence, and then the similar forms occur in other works, so that the way it's assembled is like these kind of riffs of notes. Technically, the work is made from the wooden parts are steam bent ash. The colouring on the surface is a consequence of the way that as the steaming process. When wood is bent, when you steam it, you need to get the bend is achieved by compression rather than by extension. When you bend something, you either stretch the outside or you squash the inside. And most times if you bend something, there's a kind of half and half thing that goes on. But bending the wood, you need to keep the length the same, so that actually as you bend it around, you can't let it increase, and you can't let it stretch on the outside of the curve. If you do that, it starts to crack and split. So you take all so the steaming adds water, and then the bending pushes it out like a sponge. And in order to keep the length constant, the pieces are put in when they come out of the steamer, they're straight away put into a metal strip with a holder with a end stop, which has a metal strip, which is used to bend it against the former. And the action of the hot wood against the metal produces an oxidation. I think it's something to do with the tannin in the wood reacting with the metal. I'm not absolutely sure, but that produces this kind of patination, slightly the greying of the wood surface, which is I actually like this very much, and it's quite a deep stain that's produced. So the pieces are made individually. Once they're bent, the bending is it needs to dry off. So the bend needs to be held for a couple of days in order to for the wood to dry off, and then it becomes quite stable. In previous things I've made, it's been very important to maintain dimensions. So actually I've used very elaborate drying jigs. In this case, it hasn't been so important, because another thing the tabs do is they line up individual pieces against one another, so that it ensures that across a particular surface there is a continuity. The way that the work was made, the way the work was made was that the first thing that we did was just to work out what kinds of curve we could produce from this simple question of whether we could bend or in a spiral or in a twist. And then there was a period when I wanted to work on how I was going to use these, so whether it was just to produce one thing, or and it ended up with coming up with this idea of being able to string them together in different sequences to get different kinds of curve. It breaks down to 8 or 10 different shapes, which are made in large numbers, made together into groups of 3, 4, 5 or 6, and then added together and cut as kind of reduced, or to change where the curve stops into these sequences. So yes, there are building blocks. I think that's sort of more like writing, in the sense that writing is composed of, and even letter making. I mean, letters are composed of lines that do this, and then the lines that form the letters then form words, which then form sentences. So I have some reservations about saying that they're linguistic, in the sense that there's no grammar and there's no syntax, and there's no but there are sequences, and there are different sequences, and they are associational as well. And so there is another way in which I've talked about it with is that because they're like a kind of residue as well, like peelings or things left behind. This idea that orange peel is one example that we used, or pencil shaving. So I mean, I quite like this image of the floor cracking and kind of curling up. The titling, which does refer to a message, is a way of abbreviating language to kind of slightly distance you from the romanticism of calling it "You Wait for the Sea," which has a kind of certain poetic, so if you kind of abbreviate that, you kind of slightly distance yourself from it. So it was also to use language as a way of distancing you from the world, as well as the ways we talk about the world both describe it, but also sometimes distance you from it. I also wanted you to feel that when you come into this room, there is the fullness of this room, the space both in between and around has been used, and that the contrast between this room and Gallery 2 is a positive feeling, that the space of the galleries is also used in a not only as a space in which things are shown, but it's a space in which you experience as itself, mediated through the work, but so that the relationship between the two rooms is intended to be a very positive relation. I mean, and also this kind of fullness of colour and kind of intensity of form that you get in the ceramic work through there. So the sound piece is constructed from an interview, not unlike this one. But we did it we tried to look for somewhere to do it that was supposedly quiet, and we found this. It was a bandstand in a park. Actually, we did it in a bandstand in a park. It was part of a film, and when we checked it out, it seemed like a kind of perfect location. And then when we went to make it was an interview for a film, so we were shooting in 16mm, so it actually was quite, it's quite a kind of big setup, and also expensive. But there was just an incredible amount of activity going on around the bandstand. People arriving, bus, someone fixing something, and I was continually interrupted by and having to hold my train of thought. But I was also very nervous for some reason. Sometimes I too can get nervous or think ahead something and trying to answer. And I ended up doing an interview where I was continuously, and I do it anyway. I do say quite a lot as a way of both stopping you interview, saying as a way of keeping, of saying, yes, I'm thinking about this, and I don't want you to say something because I'm still engaged in it. And when we'd finished, I said, well, at some point we should do a kind of assembly of all the which this is, and it is in real time. There isn't any. It's not it's one interview or one sequence. There's no change, and actually you can hear on the tape that other things, and I find quite interesting, is that the bird song goes on quite uninterruptedly, and people talking. There's kind of guy banging his thing. I mean, all of that goes on, and funnily enough, though, I do say most of the things that I might want to say if you listen to them, but in very abbreviated form. Yeah. And I also think that language creates a space, and you can think of language as the metaphor for language is often as if it were the sea, so that the language is a sea in which we swim. So you wait for the sea seems to be an appropriate way in which those two work together, and it deals with there is a different. So if the room with the single ceramic piece is one, the space has one particular dynamic, then this big room has another dynamic. Then the room, the kind of interior monologue has another, the space is, it's another version of space.